Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11 at the highest possible level. This week's guest, it is his second time on the show. If you want to listen to his first episode, go back to episode 57. Seth Taylor is in the 11 today, and you may be asking yourself, as this show is about how to get to the highest possible level, if Seth is not a current coach, not a current player, how does he factor into this equation? Well, honestly, Seth is probably one of my favorite guests to have on the show because I have a really big fascination with the intersection of mental health and sport, specifically mental health and soccer, as I have a personal relationship with struggles with mental health. And Seth is a person who, probably the best way to put it would be, he is a person who helps others and specifically does so much great work with helping athletes get the best out of themselves, and has worked with countless MLS players and players really all over the world, and now has also ventured into even some other sports as well at super high level. And so it's amazing to hear his insight on what some of these players go through, the stress and the rigors that they face and undertake, and how he works with these players to help them in their journey. I'm probably not the best at explaining exactly what he does, so I will leave that to Seth as we kick it off in the episode here. Make sure before you go that if you are watching this on YouTube right now that you are subscribed to the channel. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple, that you are also subscribed to the podcast. And without further ado, here's myself. Back to the 11 podcast. Stepping in to the 11 this week for his second time is Seth Taylor. First of all, Seth, as I know, you just mentioned to me there, your weeks are not exactly always the easiest or the lightest in terms of a schedule. So I appreciate you finding an hour window for me.
Well, you got the very, very first hour of the week, so I'm as fresh as it gets, man. Straight out of an acupuncture session, so I'm good. I'm good to go.
All right, so we're gonna get the best. This would be a different episode if it was Friday afternoon, but
100%.
But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. I kind of wanted to start by saying, my experience with you, and like I told you before, I've had so many players on this show, and it's been like I love it. I love speaking to players. I love getting the opportunity to share their stories. And there's so many episodes where I'll come away and even, weeks or months later, I'll think about something that, a player said that really kind of resonated with me, or something about their story that was really impactful. And I think I told this to you once before, but there's things that, like, I think we might have had our first episode like 2 years ago. And I'm like, there's things I still think about that you said, like, to this day.
Wow.
And I think that's a really powerful thing to do. And I think there's probably two reasons for it. One of which is my fascination with kind of mental health and athletics and where that intersection is. And obviously you're the perfect person to kind of speak to about that. But also I think you kind of spoke to so many things that I was feeling, but didn't know how to really articulate, and showed me that, yeah, I've spoken to other players who go through the same things and go through periods where they don't quite like the game, and the game is more of a burden than it is this joy that they thought it once was. And I was like, wow, it's so great to actually hear somebody else, maybe, I don't know if validate's the right word, but kind of validate that emotion. So needless to say, very grateful, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit down with you here again today and kind of talk about some other things when it comes to mental health and soccer and athletics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, man.
Of course. And so, in speaking about that, just there with maybe reference to a specific athlete that I just had on recently. Her name's Addison Steiner. I thought this would be an interesting one to kind of bring up with you in the beginning. She was a player who played at a really high level in college, and then she went to Sweden, and then she played in the NWSL, and kind of hit a point where the game just felt like so much. It felt like so much stress and so much pressure for her, and she also kind of didn't really get the opportunity to explore other parts of her personality or other parts of her life, and so she took a step away from the game,
Mm-hmm.
and now is kind of coming back to it. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts if like you have ever worked with a player on something like that, or see players that really strongly consider taking a step away, but maybe coming back. And I know it's different than
Yeah.
true retirement.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really, really, really common experience. Really common in the sense that, for the most part, elite athletes, and you being one of them, their identities are so tied to the game that it's actually quite difficult it's a love-hate experience. It's actually, it's rooted in a lot of, in psychology, we call it attachment theory, but you have this really intense almost parental attachment to the game. So you want to get away from it because you want freedom. Right.
Yeah.
And then when you get away from it, you find that you don't know who you are. And so you drift back towards it, and it feels almost like a type of codependency at times.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny, when I was at one of the MLS rookie symposiums a few years back, and they had a panel of retired players to talk to the rookies, and the guy who was running the panel asked, there was 5 guys on the stage, and he asked, how many of you guys tried to make a comeback at some point? And every guy raised their hand. And nobody up there was like superstars. They were all like good players. They were all like competent MLS players with careers of like 8 years or more kind of thing, but they weren't like superstars or anything, but they were all like, yeah, they'd all tried to make a comeback. And, I've walked quite a few players into retirement. One of them a few years ago, he only played 3 years pro, and then he stepped away, and he's working in an NCAA program, really high level right now. And even he, like, when I talk to him, he's always like, oh, I'm just discovering I've got so much left in the tank. And there is that it's an identity thing. You can very, very clearly see it's a sense of self, and who am I without that? And every human being goes through identity crisis at some point, especially
Yeah.
as we transition from one phase of our lives or our careers to another. But athletes in a unique way, because most of them, I don't even know Addison, but I would assume she's been playing organized soccer since she was about 5 years old,
Yeah.
which is traumatic. And you're at the heart of this really important developmental phase of your life, and you're in the arena already. And you and I've talked about that before, but if you're in the arena at 5 years old, then soccer is your identity. And
Yeah.
so it's a tough thing without, especially, I'm guessing she's doing some therapeutic work or something like that. But
Yeah.
like, because you have to have that. You have to have therapeutic support to be able to move into that type of identity transition, because it's a profound thing. And most people can't relate to that, because we weren't, I wasn't doing, like, if someone's an accountant, they weren't doing accounting at 5 years old in front of, 1,000 people, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With their
Yeah.
parents on the sideline, like, cheering for them. It's
Yeah.
just a totally different type of thing. And the job you guys have is such a unique, um, incredibly cool, but actually, at times quite damaging, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really common thing.
So, what do you think is kind of the resolution to? I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's something that I've spoken about, and I felt in a very real way, and my identity being tied to this performance based business or this performance based endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, there's been times where when the performance is not good, all of a sudden you start to question where how do I factor into this equation, right? If my performance isn't good, does that make me as a person not good or not
Yeah.
worthy or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So how do you think, I guess, where's the resolution in that? Is it a bit of, do you try and disconnect your identity from the game, or because we do, a lot of us, we do love the game and we do want to have it be to a certain extent our identity, but it's almost like, is it healthier for us to not?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll pick that apart in a variety of ways. Starting with, like, when most elite athletes, when they say they love the game, they don't actually love the game. You know what I mean? That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Like, it just like if I am working with a codependent married couple, and they say, well, they use the word all the time, like, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. They use it all the time, but they clearly don't love each other. They hate each other. And it doesn't mean they can't find love. I mean, they can. There's love buried underneath everything, but that's not the function. The functional relationship isn't one of love. And that's how it
Yeah.
is with most athletes with the game. They say they love the game, because they have to have the game. It's like an abusive parent, they love their mom and dad, and it's not mom and dad's fault, and they'll protect mom and dad all day long, even though mom and dad are abusive. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
they need it so much, and so it's not really a love thing, but it's the answer is to go into it. There's a tension there that you're describing, and unless people have played, I mean, everybody can relate to it at some level, I guess, but there's a tension. I would equate it to the person out there that's listening right now that hates their job or just doesn't like their job, but wants
Yeah.
to leave, but can't because I got a decent salary, or golden handcuffs, or they've got a good benefits or whatever, right? There's a tension in leaving home, in a sense, and
Yeah.
like when we find our safety, I mean, the core of identity is safety and security, like a sense of I am safe, I am valuable here in this space. And to leave that, there's a massive tension. And that tension has to be resolved through a process that we can only call therapeutic, right? And does someone need a professional therapist to go through that? Not necessarily. But you do have to have some sense of your internal landscape. You know what I mean? Because when you're
Yeah.
sitting there only trapped in your head, if you're only trapped in your head and you can't feel the tension in your body and work through that, through whatever process it is, it's like, oftentimes I'll have somebody working through something, and they've got some part of them wants to just scream like the Incredible Hulk, like just
Mm.
rage and scream because there's all this pain that's there. And I mean, I'm thinking of several like high level players. I'm thinking of a guy on the national team that I work with right now, and I just had him just with his eyes closed, just looking at that part of him and just letting that part rage and rage and rage. And there's an energy. Trauma essentially is an energy that needs to be moved, and that energy was moving from within him and actually moving out of his body, so that he could feel clearer in the body. And that's the problem, is that there is a tension that must be resolved, and if we don't resolve it, and we can't even feel it because we're so trapped in our heads, then you really are not going to be able to push through that space. You're always going to be left with what they call the Uncle Rico syndrome. I don't know if you remember Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How much you want to bet? Coach put me in for a quarter. How much you want? I could twirl football over those mountains, and you get left in that space. And I still know guys. I know guys have been retired. I got a good friend of mine, played in MLS for 11 years, and he's been retired 10 years, and almost 10 years, and he's still. You can see it. There's still this thing inside, because all I have to do is hang out with him and a few other guys that he played with, and we'll go have drinks or whatever. And they just go into those glory days so intensely, so quickly. I mean, and they don't even know it, but they're telling the same story they've told every time we've ever hung out. Same stories, like it's never been said before. And it's because there's so much a part of them that's still left on the battlefield, in a sense. And to
Yeah.
really transition, you got to do the work. There's no other way. You got to do the work. And everybody needs therapy. I just think athletes, it's a unique type of trauma. You know what I mean? Because you were traumatized right alongside in these developmental years, right alongside these things you end up doing for a living. I mean, it's an all-consuming experience, and most of them end up in the game in some fashion, because either
Yeah.
podcasting, talking about it on television,
Yep.
coaching is obviously really, really common, because it's a part of it. But then, of course, if we do the work, and I think you're discovering that, it seems you're discovering that if you do the work internally, then you turn around and it's almost like you're a prophet in the space, where you're going in and you're able to bring salvation, in a sense, to those that are still in that space, which is, of course, what it's meant to be. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what kind of I comes up for me as you say that is, I definitely think I was a person who thought, as soon as I'm done playing, I'm gonna go be a coach, and I'm gonna coach forever. And I
Yeah.
think, and lately I've kind of come to this point where I think more, and maybe it's just a factor of I've leaned so far into the sport and playing it, that kind of, it's almost like your fantasy is always to go and do like the complete opposite. And
Mm.
so I've kind of said, I've said this to multiple people. I'm like, when I'm done playing, I don't think I'm going to touch a ball for like a year at least, or look
Oh
at
yeah,
a ball for a year.
I've heard that so many times. It's crazy.
And yeah, and maybe it's not true, and maybe I'm full of shit. Honestly, who knows? But but I genuinely believe,
In
like,
9 months. In 9 months.
yeah, 8 months, all of a sudden somebody passes me out and I'm in.
Yeah.
Um, but I think like there's kind of something that you spoke to there, that there's a bit of, when you're pursuing something like soccer or any sport really, you kind of, your life almost gets divided into these different buckets, or like these different lanes in which you can really pour yourself into. And when you're trying to pursue the game at the highest level, you're like, I need to put as much as I can into the physical lane, getting my body to where it needs to be, getting my performance to where it needs to be, networking to be able to find clubs. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I haven't really put anything into my fostering relationships with my family, or, looking to find a partner, or all these different other things that you may have interests in, or, what's my business pursuit going to be after I'm done playing?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like you come to this screeching halt at the end of your career, and now are like, damn, I've got nothing in the other buckets.
Mhm.
And so is that something that you also kind of try and bring up with players as well, in that it doesn't have to be this singular focus on just becoming the best athlete you can be, that can be such a big part of you, but you also need to kind of live a full authentic life in all sorts of different
Sure.
aspects of the way that you go about your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, I actually do that slightly different in the sense that I think I just lean into wherever the player wants to go. So if I'm working with a player and they're like, it's for me, it's 100% about, I've got to play, I want to play in a World Cup and I'm putting everything into it. I go, all right, let's lean into that.
Yeah.
And you can become healthy within that space. You know what I mean? You really can. I mean, inevitably, you'll find that if someone starts leaning into, I want to be as healthy as possible and as elite as possible, you'll find that relationships, especially intimate relationships, tend to wander into the space because there's so much a part of how we balance ourselves as human beings that
Mm-hmm.
if we don't have that, it tends to be a very grounding force for most people that are pushing to the highest level of anything, right? When what we're talking about here is we're talking about elite performance. I mean, like if you want to go, I mean, sports is just one of those things where if you want to go and you're always on the edge of a cliff, you need something that grounds you, and relationships tend to be that. And so when I'm working with people, that tends to kind of always become a thing. But as far as like interests other than the sport, it's not necessary. What's necessary is that they have a sense that when they're coming to the end, that they have a sense that it's okay to take time. It's okay
Hmm.
to. I encourage pilgrimage, as a process, not necessarily as a classical style of ancient pilgrimage or something like that. Even though I've had athletes do that, but what I encourage is the ability to go. There's no need for us to rush into what are we going to do with the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. It'll reveal its it'll reveal itself the more you lean into your truest self, your highest self. So the healthier someone gets, that stuff tends to reveal itself. You switch from being someone who has to hunt for the thing to someone who just the thing is revealed.
Mm.
And that's really what I try to do is, I mean, the language I use is somewhat spiritual. Like I'm actually helping people switch from their ego as that main operating system, which is this, I got to figure it out. I got to figure it out, to their spirit, which is this kind of magnetic field system in the body. But like I show them how to use that, and that system tends to kind of bring things to you. And so if when it comes time to transition, rather than like this is the difference between going and seeking something, or like your classical kind of pilgrimage thing, where pilgrimage is really about wandering, you know and allowing things to just reveal themselves as you go. I mean, because I can sit down with anybody, I can sit down with you and go, well, what brings you joy? And if someone's like, I like snowboarding, I go, all right, let's do that. Let's go snowboarding. And you know, and if they're super broke, I go, oh, that's okay. You can do that pretty cheap if you learn how to do it, and just be okay with what is. And once you are, man, it's amazing to watch how things just start to reveal themselves. You know,
Yeah.
creativity starts to pop up. Things start to kind of organize themselves a little bit. Of course, if you played at a high level, one of the benefits of playing at a high level is that you tend to be pretty connected. People they get high level connections because business, whatever, is love to hang out with professional athletes. And so you get these connections, and so they tend to have opportunities come at them a lot. But I just always encourage just grace, lots of just be. Let's just learn how to be for a while, and let's meditate, and let's move energy, and let's do the therapeutic work, and let's let this process move through us so that we can transition well. Learning how to transition. One of my mentors told me, I asked him that one time, what's the key to transitions? And he said, have funerals, have lots of funerals. That's what he said. He goes, you have to learn grief as a skill,
Hmm.
because everything you gain, you lose something, and you have to be able to learn how to move through that well and let go of it well, or else the next things, you're not going to really be ready for it. And that's what I find with a lot of athletes. They try to move on because they're scared. And so I heard Clint Dempsey say that I'm going to, hang up my boots and no one's ever going to see. He said, no one's ever going to hear from me again. So he said, less than a year later, he's in the commentary booth with sunglasses on and on national television,
Yeah.
talking about soccer, because of course he is, right? And and I'm not saying that as a rip on Clint. I'm just saying it's that whole mentality of when I finally get to that spot, then I'll be happy, and this is what I'm
Yeah.
going to do. Is silly, you know. When the thing is, if I'm asking Clint, what are you going to do? The best thing in the world with him is just go, I don't know. We'll see. We're gonna let it come. Just let it
Hmm.
come for a while. Just gonna be for a while. I know he goes, just go fishing. That's his thing. We go fishing, and we're gonna let it come, because there's, everyone. I mean, you guys. It's fascinating when I say you guys. I hope that's not like offensive language, but like when you say you
No,
got
no,
you
yeah.
elite athletes, because I know that this is something that's coming for you at some point, right? Like you, you're unique creatures, but you're very young. People were calling Clint Dempsey this old grizzly veteran. He was like 35. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
insane. You're incredibly young, and so most of your life is ahead of you. To act like there's a no true purpose is insane, right? And I've listened to. I talked to a guy who is one of the top color commentator soccer announcers on the planet right now,
Hmm.
and he's just like, he hated it. He hated it. He's just like, this is stupid. I just talk about soccer all day and it's meaningless. And he has that sense inside him going, there's got to be something deeper than this. There's got to be something. I'm meant for more than just this, just being a talking robot, because all I know is soccer. And of course, that's true. That's very, very true. But we don't learn how to grieve that well. We don't learn how to transition and move from one thing to another. We don't learn how to go on pilgrimage. We don't learn how to truly find that new part of ourselves. But it's a it's deep. There's no way around it. It's super deep. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also interesting for someone like me to kind of look at what you've done and see. And I don't know, maybe if you can speak to it more personally, like you've always struck me as a person who's like a kind of a yes and person rather than a or person. I'm either this or I'm that, right? Like I either heal through therapeutic methods, or I'm an author. Like you're always kind of pursuing multiple different things. And was that something that you always just had about you, and like I have lots of different interests and I don't feel like I need to
Mhm.
just turn one off and just become one dimensional? Was that always something that you just leaned into?
Yeah, I actually learned that. I learned the nuance of that more in my deep religious identity,
Hmm.
than I did in vocational. The vocational thing was this. I don't know. I just kind of. I've done some radical life experiments in my life, like radical, where I'm just like, all right, that's it. I'm gonna sit. I'm gonna meditate every day, and I'm gonna wait for stuff to happen. And like got really poor for a long time because of that. But it also just completely changed my life and changed our lives as a family. But the the biggest transition for me was I was raised really religious. Like, I was a very religious kid, and my parents were missionaries, and my father died on on the mission field and all this kind of thing. And it was so ingrained in me in a really toxic way, to be honest with you. Like, it was so ingrained in me that as I started to do my own therapeutic work, because I was just depressed and anxiety and addiction and all this kind of stuff, as I started doing my own therapeutic work, you know, I think religion was buried in me in a similar way that soccer is buried in a lot of elite athletes, because it's the religion. I mean, I'm thinking of a buddy of mine right now, like one of my clients right now. Actually, I asked him, like, do you have any memories in your life earlier than soccer? And he goes, no. He said, I don't have a memory in my life that's not soccer. But that's how it was for me with religion. Like it was just church, religion, and
Wow.
a pretty angry form of God. And so transitioning out of that, I started to realize as I healed and as I grew, my relationship with that idol started to change. And over time, it started to shift and started to change. And it went from being kind of a white dude in the sky that's pretty pissed off to a white dude in the sky that likes me, and kind of, and then gradually all of a sudden, maybe it's not a white dude in the sky. Maybe it's something more different than that, and then it started to transition, but people would still go, well, are you a Christian? Are you a Christian? And I still, what was happening was the core of that thing was changing. And I was actually holding to it more and more and more, finding a more authentic, true version of this thing. And rather than I'm abandoning this thing because that sucks. And so I'm going over here now, which I see a lot of people do. They deconstruct in their brain. Their ego deconstructs this thing and now it goes and finds a different idol in a sense. That's a better one. Mine just kept evolving and evolving and evolving and evolving and evolving. And now I can tell you I'm still a Christian.
Hmm.
But if you put me in a church, they'd probably, burn me at the stake. You know what I mean? But it's still, but I hold to this thing as a truer, more beautiful thing than it ever was. And so I watched that transition. I watched how nuanced it was. And all along the way, are you a Christian or are you not a Christian? I'm like, well, it's a complicated question. It has this
Yeah.
really complicated nuance to what that means and how that works. And so, when it comes to that, that's kind of how I learned that, like that. Oh, so no one is one thing or another thing. And when I hear
Yeah.
clients talk about themselves, they always come on, they start talking about themselves like they're one person. Well, I'm just incredibly frustrated. And I don't know why I can't think differently than this. You'll get it. They'll say this. I just can't live with myself sometimes. You'll hear
Mm.
that kind of stuff and you'll go, wait a minute, hold on. I can't live with myself. Which one's you? And they're always like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You just talked about yourself as two separate people. So
Yeah.
let's figure out which one's you and which one's having a hard time with the other part, and then we can have a conversation between those two parts, and so that's the kind of thing. And that's why, I mean, I just finished reading the classical book by Herman Hesse, Siddhartha, yesterday. And it's interesting because, Siddhartha is kind of coming to this realization that he is the river, and that the river is the ocean, and the river is the mouth of the river, and the river is the source of the river, and the river is all those things at once. So he is that young man that set out, on a journey, and he's that old man that's ferrying people across the river, and he's all those things in between. And that's the thing, is that, like, 20 years from now, you're going to see the kid that's just working his butt off to try to make it to the highest level, and you're going to deeply love and appreciate that kid because you're going to realize you're still him at some
Yeah.
level. You know what I mean? And that's that idea of helping people be able to see themselves with that type of nuance. It helps people see themselves with more grace, and it makes transitions easier.
Yeah.
It makes, that's just what's required. It's required, man. We have to be able to see that kind of nuance in
Yeah.
our processes.
Speaking, you spoke to that juxtaposition of religion and sport, right? And for many
Mhm.
people, especially when you say, use that term of you guys, right? For us as athletes, it kind of, in a lot of ways, does become our religion. And I'm sure I find as well, like it often can be, when you speak to people about religion, it can sometimes be a sensitive subject. And
Yeah.
sometimes in the same way that it is for sport, it can sometimes be a sensitive subject. And so when you are speaking to athletes that maybe they are coming to you for help, but this is their religion. It's very sensitive to them. They're very kind of guarded about it. Does it take a little bit of time for them to be able to kind of let their guard down with you and speak to you in a kind of more candid way? Because
Yeah.
also in the same sense, part of our training is to hide what our weaknesses are or hide what our vulnerabilities are and promote what our strengths are, on the pitch.
Yeah.
If I don't have that strong of a left foot, okay, how can I kind of mask that, or how can I get it onto my right to be able to play more on my right? Like
Yeah.
those are the
Yeah.
things that were kind of instilled in us as a player growing up, and because we were always taught too, on the flip side of that, if we see a weakness in the opponent, well, that's where
Mhm.
we go. Oh, the left back doesn't have pace, so what are we doing? We're playing in behind the left back all day today. So I
Yeah.
guess my question is, does there take time for certain players that you start to work with to really kind of feel comfortable and actually showing a little bit of weakness?
Yeah. For the most part, no. Just because the ones that come to me are pretty desperate. You know what I mean? They're hurting. I talk to players all the time, or I'll have a conversation. Like I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago in MLS player needs help. Talked to him, had a conversation with him, and he never called me back. You know what I mean? And so those are the guys that aren't ready. You know what I mean? But the ones that end up going, all right, here's the money, let's get going. They're ready to go for the most
Yeah.
part, and then they're kind of so, that's one of the benefits of being kind of a referral only is that
Mm.
that people come to me are usually ready to come to me. And they've tried other stuff, and the sports psychology didn't work, and this thing didn't work, and they really need help. But I wish I'm one of those guys where every single day I'm watching people do what you're describing, avoid at all costs the truth. And they're doing it in the media, and you can see it. They're using sports psychology, which for the most part remains as a mental skills kind of thing. They're using all that stuff to try to bypass the trauma, and it's not working. I'm thinking of a player on the Seattle Mariners right now that I'm just like, oh my God, if I could just help that guy. I'm one
Yeah.
of those guys every day where I get texts every day, hey, this guy really needs your help, man. From friends of mine that are watching an NFL game or something, like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's a million ways to bypass it,
Mm.
and guys spend huge amounts of money on programs and psychologists and stuff like this to find ways to bypass trauma, to master trauma, to get around trauma, to push down trauma. But they don't actually, confront the trauma, and so in the end, it dictates the reality. Always,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And like, you said before, you work with so many people and so many players right now. So it's not as if to say just simply someone that's coming to you for help, but really anyone out there who might do something similar to you. Do you think it's a point that athletes need to hit, almost of they have to get to that kind of dark place in order to really go and seek the help? Or is there something that you could say to an athlete that's maybe a bit on the fence of, I think I do need help, but like you said before, maybe they're not ready? Or is it
yeah,
really just a matter of you have to go to the dark spot?
yeah. You kind of do. Like suffering tends to be the thing. What now? Some guys don't have to suffer as much as the other guy, and why, I have no idea. It's one of the great mysteries. Like why did that guy I talked to today, he's going to need another year or two of not getting any playing time and having all this anxiety before he goes, okay, maybe I should get help. Like I don't
Mm,
understand that part. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing. Like I remember speaking at the rookie symposium, MLS thing, and
yeah.
there's 70 guys out there, and that more than half of them are experiencing pretty high levels of anxiety, and half the rest are in delusion that they're going to walk into training camp and destroy everybody,
Yeah.
right? Their first camp. And I remember just one guy texted me afterwards, said, can I talk to you? One guy out of like 70, 75 guys, can I talk to you? Yeah, yeah. And he was just like, I can see that there's this thing functioning in me. Why that guy? I don't understand. He's just an old soul or whatever, but he ended up doing this super profound work inside of himself and really, really helping himself. And then he got like 7 other guys said, you got to call this, he knew, you got to call this guy. I don't know. It's a strange thing in how, but I mean, Carl Jung said, no one comes to consciousness without suffering.
Mm,
That's the catalyst. That is the catalyst. That's catalyst for me. It's the catalyst for you. I think athletes suffer more earlier because because of the nature of the job itself.
yeah.
You're always a breath away from everything being over, and ever there's somebody headhunting you 24/7, and they're just trying to take your job all the time. And how do you rest? How do you find peace? Where most people, that's just not the reality. It's
Yeah.
just not the reality, and it's its own type of suffering to go sit in a cubicle somewhere in a job you don't love.
Yep.
But and it's its own. I've got clients that are rich CEOs that are miserable because and struggling in their way. I mean, I've literally got a guy who's just like, how many cars do you got to buy before you'll
Yeah.
be happy? It's all the different kinds, but sports is just a more intensive form of suffering than most. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah, and so forgive me if this is a too general of a question, right? And yeah, correct me where I have any points of contention with you, but like, there's part of me that kind of wonders like, what really is sports psychology? There's so many people that speak about this idea of they're sports psychologists and they offer mental training for athletes, and there's just always been kind of a feeling in myself of I don't know, like, is that even real? Like, am I biased in thinking like what are you truly going to offer to me, and by coming in and giving me tips and tricks on like how to be more confident when kind of like we've spoken about for, the past half hour, a lot of this is for so many of us is rooted in deep, like, traumatic things that have happened to us throughout the course of our young lives and our young sporting lives. Like, it's not necessarily just, oh, I get a little bit nervous and then, I do some breath work and now all of a sudden I'm more confident. Like, there's really things that need to be kind of addressed at the root cause before we can actually establish a healthier way to go forward about playing. And so I
Yeah.
guess, I don't know what the best way to ask the question is, but just your general thoughts on kind of sports psychology. Like, what exactly is it, and what role does it play in sport?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a PhD in sports psychology, obviously, so speaking to it at a super high level might be difficult, but I run into it constantly, right? Because a lot of the athletes I work with have worked in it and tried it and done stuff, and some of them even will work with me and a sports psychologist at the same point, at the same time, because they find, well, this person's sports psychology is much more performance based,
Hmm.
right? Of course, I want my athletes to perform well, and I'm hoping, I'm cheering for them, but that's not my focus. My focus is I mean, well, I shouldn't say it's not my focus. It's a measurement tool, right? But the process for most sports psychology is a behavioral process that remains within the ego. The ego, as the thinking mind, is an operating system that is constantly functioning, right? It's constantly functioning. And for most people, it's kind of their primary operating system. And the goal with most sports psychology is to retrain or reprogram the ego. The ego tends to be, that's the thought in your brain that say you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And so the idea essentially is through different techniques is to retrain that. I'm good enough. I'm good enough. I'm good enough. I'm better. I can do this. And to be able to consciously retrain that actual thought process in the mind. That's essentially what sums up what sports psychology is. And then be able to, in real time, program the body to listen to that new belief system. But the problem is that I've identified is it's not deep enough, because what's driving most of that I'm not good enough thought process is trauma. And trauma doesn't live in the mind, it lives in the body. The mind interprets it. That's all it is. The ego interprets it. I don't think sports psychology is deep enough, and most people don't. I mean, I live in Seattle, and the Sounders have a sports psychologist they work with, and I've got clients that are in the system there, and they'll go work with him, and then they come to me going, well, this is insane, really, and I'm going, yeah, I know. And it's not that he's bad or anything like that. It's just
Mm.
they're going, this isn't helping me. I mean, literally, one of the guys is like, he's like, well, I did some work with their psychologist. I go, well, how's that going? Is it helping you? And he goes, he told me I shouldn't think about soccer. Just don't think about soccer, and then you'll be good. I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah,
How's
not
that
helping.
working out for you?
Yeah, how's it all working out? It's not helping. He's like, no, it's idiotic. And it's not that there isn't some value, but the thing is, the problem is this, is that kind of skill set, what he's saying, because what he's essentially saying is let your mind rest on other things, or not, or completely let the mind go. And I understand that. Be in the body, not in the mind, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what he's trying to tell them. But the problem is that unless the trauma work is done, you can't understand that unless you're doing that because the mind kicks in. If you have no awareness of it as a separate thing, it's going to kick in and interpret what's going on in the body. So I have no awareness of the body, and I can't control the mind, even though you're telling me to control it. I can't, because you're not aware of why it's doing what it's doing. And
Mm.
so it's not a deep enough thing. I mean, I was at a think tank. It's like an MLS think tank situation where
Yeah.
a bunch of guys, they just threw a bunch of us in a room to talk about issues around depression and anxiety for former players and stuff like that. And one of the guys in there, who was a PhD in sports psychology, I was talking about, hey, we need to help these guys when it comes to getting healthy as people in their psycho-spiritual way of being healthy. That will help things. And we were talking about current players at the time, and this guy with the PhD, he literally said, and I quote, if you get them healthy, they will lose their edge. You've got to keep them zombies at some level. That's what he said. And the problem isn't with like the insanity of what he's saying. The problem is that that's actually a baseline. Like, that's their thinking. It's an archaic, like, primitive way of thinking about human beings and athletes.
Yeah.
It's a slave mentality, to be honest with you. Like, it's a slave mentality. We keep them kind of docile and subdued so that they will be these angry animals that will run faster. And
Mm-hmm.
that's insane, man. That's insane. Where the truth is, you get somebody to the point where they're completely embodied, like they're totally embodied, and the truth comes home to them that there is absolutely nothing here to lose. There isn't, because there isn't. No matter what, no matter what the fans do, no matter what happens in the game, no matter what, there's zero to lose. This is a process that you're in, and win or lose, there's a gift that is going to be given to you. And once they know that, head to toe in their bodies, can't be shaken, no matter what. I mean, I went down a couple weeks ago to Miami to watch the U.S. Open Cup final. I had a client playing in that,
Mm-hmm.
and he got man of the match, played really, really well. And they won the champion. Houston won the championship, and asked me afterwards. He's like, "I'm curious, like, how is that for you?" Because he's thinking, he said, "Ask me, how's that for your ego?" Because, like, for my ego, when I see one of my athletes do that, I'm just like, this feels pretty good. I said, to be honest with you, I said, I've dealt with that. Years ago, when players that I was working with started having success, I had to work through that process, to get my ego subdued in that way. So I said, to be honest with you, I don't really care if you win or lose. If you fail or succeed, I said, I'm happy for you. Trust me, I'm celebrating. I'm happy for you. But I'm pretty neutral, because either way, my job remains the same: to use the gift, whatever is being given, because losing and failure gives us a gift as well.
Yeah.
That helps us grow.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at these guys, I'm seeing them from the day of their birth to the day of their death. I'm seeing this long process that we can call it the path to enlightenment. I think is a good term for it.
Mm.
And soccer is just a really intense catalyst for that process.
Yeah.
That's, that's the difference between what I'm doing and what sports psychology is doing. Sports psychology is, how do we get this guy to run faster, be stronger, be more confident. And confidence is an illusion. It's an illusion created by the ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we create the illusion enough that they can run faster, perform better, to get more money, and to do this kind of thing, and kind of damn the consequences, and it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts, to be honest. I'm not anti-sports psychology. I just think sports psychology needs to evolve
Yeah.
badly. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
That's a really long-winded way of saying,
No, no,
yeah.
it's okay. It definitely made me think of a lot of things as you were saying that, because I think almost there might be two things that I sense from what you said that can seem to sometimes be roadblocks for athletes, and that they see, certain levels of whether it be ownership or administration in a club as kind of viewing them that way, as an asset that we need to keep at the highest value. We need to keep their stock up, and maybe the best way to do that is to psychologically not have them be in the best place. But I think the flip side of that coin is there's almost a bit of a guilt that we have in terms of, if you go into your job as an accountant and you complain about it, other people can kind of be like, oh yeah, it must kind of suck. If you go into your job as a footballer and you complain about it, everyone's like, well, yeah, but you get to kick a ball for a living. And so
Right.
like there's this sense of guilt in that, like, you don't necessarily want to complain about what goes on, because the perception is, well, you're living the dream and this is
Right.
your dream job.
Right.
And so yeah, I guess I wonder if that is, like, again, an inhibitor for athletes to really get to a place where they feel like, I don't know, they are allowed to, like you said there, be kind of their truest authentic self, and convince themselves that that might actually be what is best for me to, get the best out of myself athletically.
Sure. Well, and the truth is, like, if you get healthy enough, you can step back and finally realize that, oh, I am an asset. That's the job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right. And not feel hurt by it. But that's the problem when it's tied to your identity, right? And, you grow up in some academy. I had a kid at one point I was working with. He got cut. He was an academy product, and he got cut by the team after 2 years of being on the first team, and they cut him, and he cried. He said, we were. I thought we were. He said they said we were family. They said we were family.
Mm.
No, no, it was a business from the beginning. There were family elements of it because that helps, and because that's what teams are. But it's a business, and if we're healthy enough, if we become healthy enough, then we can see that. I can see that very, very clearly. I got a guy right now, I'm helping him with contract negotiation, and it's triggering him, and there's some stuff going on, and he's an American player, so he's undervalued, of course, because in the
Yeah.
MLS, it's
Yeah.
remarkably, there's still kind of an anti-American bias. And so he's being undervalued, and And the whole goal is, can we go through this in a healthy way, not taking anything personally, recognizing this is business. These guys aren't bad people. That's when he comes in. He's like, well, I just, his wife taking it super personally. I talked to her and she's like, they don't value him and they don't do this. And I'm just like, hey, I go, they are businessmen, you know,
Hmm.
they are working with a salary cap. They are trying to get the max value out of things. And they see him as replaceable because he is. Yeah. Is he good? Yes. Is there a million other guys waiting? There are. So let's not take it too personally. Let's just recognize that there's bigger things at play that will determine where he is in his life, and we don't have to take anything personally.
Yeah.
But that's a very mature thing, which means that's a very integrated thing, which means you got to be healthy to be able to get to that space, or else you
Yeah.
will take it personally, and you'll waste a bunch of energy sitting around wondering, trying to, because your ego is working overtime to create some story about your value, you know, rather than just knowing your value as a person, being wise, making decisions wisely, and then focusing on your game and recognizing if you produce, money will come.
Yeah.
It always comes to people that are just really good at stuff. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm really good at this. And so money comes. It just comes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's why I love speaking to you as well, in the sense that you can kind of create context to this at a high level, right? For those of
Mm.
us that aren't necessarily playing at the MLS level, or even those of us that are, that may be listening, and it's like, okay, there's so many people that do go through those exact same things. There's so many people that have gone into that contract negotiation and thought, man, I've been here for 5, 6 years. Like, why are they not taking care of me? And it's like, there's just a strict reality to this business. And I think why I like having conversations like this, and why I like having conversations with other athletes, and also hearing other athletes come out and share their stories, like guys at even a higher level than the MLS. You hear about like Andre Schurrle was a national team player, like played in a World Cup at 29, was like, I can't do it anymore. I can't handle the pressure. Per
Mm.
Mertesacker played at Arsenal for years and years, like
Mm.
wrote about how nearly before every match he used to go and throw up because
Yeah.
it just had so much tension built within him that
Yeah.
he had to be let out. And there's like this, I don't know. I just like the idea of kind of changing the narrative and humanizing the
Yeah.
athlete to make it not seem as if they're on this pedestal and they can't be touched, because they can. And even those
Yeah.
ones that you are amazed by, and they are amazing, some of them, the things that they can do, and you see them and you're like, wow, they're untouchable. Like, they have the same issues that you and I do.
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just playing out in an arena. It's just playing out right there in the arena. And that's the difference. The difference is the arena, and the difference is the developmental phases. Like again, at 5 years old, I wasn't, you know, doing psychology with people and helping them, you know, heal while my mom and dad watch from a sideline, that I can't run over and give them a hug, and like that way you got that I can't emphasize it enough. What makes athletes and their trauma unique is the fact that their developmental years were spent in the arena,
Mm,
and that's really what makes it unique. That's why athletes are different. All of us have trauma. Every person needs therapy, no question. But athletes are unique, and for some reason, I don't know whether it was given to me, I was designed this way, but I have a passion for that. I just think it's, and to borrow something from sports psychology, I find it fascinating to be able to work in someone's trauma and then watch it play out in the arena, because it does. I mean, every athlete that walks out there with their trauma. And you said the thing about throwing up. It's interesting because Justin Herbert said that the other day, quarterback of the Chargers. And, he said that he throws up before a game. And he said, but it's not an anxiety thing. So he said, like, okay.
all right, Bubba.
Yeah, he just signed a record contract, and I know he had anxiety about that, because like once you get to the mountaintop, then you see then you go, oh shit, here I am,
Yeah.
you know, and now you're doing that. Of course, there's huge amounts of anxiety. The question is how are you dealing with that? And it's pretty fascinating that a guy can perform at the level he's performing at while he's carrying all that. But it for most guys. I mean, we look at the ones that are successful and glorify them, but for the vast majority of players, it crushes them and it ends their careers early. The Dwayne Haskins of the world, where every tool you can possibly imagine, there's no reason the guy shouldn't be a Hall of Fame quarterback. Instead, a few years later, he's dead, and never became what he's meant to be. And everybody said, well, he was immature. Oh yeah. Well, he was playing out his trauma. The second he got there, it just, the trigger was so intense that, you know, And
Yeah.
it's a multi million dollar problem in sports, of course, because these companies invest so much money in these assets, and these assets are human beings with lots of trauma, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it was really difficult for me, and I caught myself before when we were speaking about it, kind of wanting to put trauma in quotes, right? Because I think
Mhm.
there's this like I remember when I first had that thought kind of brought to me of, oh yeah, you're dealing with this trauma, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I've not been through anything traumatic. Like, yeah, I've had difficult things in my life, but I'm not going to call it trauma because we all perceive trauma to be, you were in the military and you went to the war and now you have PTSD or things of a really drastic nature.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for you, it's a key in kind of I don't know, maybe making trauma more accessible isn't the right word, but understanding that trauma is in all of us and to varying degrees and it presents in varying different ways, but
Yeah.
that is the key and that's the root of it. And it sounds like kind of where a lot of your work has really dove into is that trauma really starts from a young age with a lot of players in their relationship with the game with a coach or with a parent or with other
Yeah.
teammates. Is that kind of where like you were just led to?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One and primary is with the parents, of course. I mean, coaches have a big impact, but if the parents are solid, then the kids can handle the coaches. They can, even at a young age.
Mm,
Coaches can have an impact, and there is a thing there, but it is primary. I mean, when you're 5 years old, when you're 6 years old, when you're 7 years old, mom and dad and their reflection of what you need is everything, right? And the problem is the arena itself. So even really good parents, they're like, well, we signed them up for soccer. But they don't know that when you put a kid out there at 6, the developmental phase he's in or she's in is, I mean, they are working 24/7 as unconscious beings, building identity based in the unconditional love or the lack thereof coming from mom and dad, based in everything they do. So anything they do, it's the feedback.
yeah.
It's the feedback of, you are good, you are not good, that was acceptable, that was not acceptable. That feedback creates a sense of self. That's literally what the task is until you're around 10. And so those developmental years, I mean, that's everything. That's just everything. And I wrote a book about it recently. I'm actually, I don't know, I'm going to shameless plug here. I've got a book coming
Yeah, for
out.
sure.
Yeah, it's called Hero. Exploring the depths of parenting in the world of youth soccer. And it's a therapeutic guidebook for parents to create some awareness, because I realize I can't tear the system down. I mean, every Saturday morning you drive around and it's just little kids running around playing soccer on every piece of grass you can imagine, right? And all of them are being traumatized because of that intense feedback. I mean, my wife texted me the other day. My son's on his first team. He's almost 10, and he's on his very first team right now.
Hmm.
And uh, my wife texted me because there was a game I couldn't make it to when I was in Miami. I couldn't make it to the game, and she calls me. She's like, "Is this how it is? Like this is insane." I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "A woman on our side on our team just yelled at a dad on the other team to shut his pie hole." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" Well, yeah. Why? Well, the referee is this 13-year-old girl, and she's not very good, and everybody's screaming at her, and so they're screaming at each other,
Yeah.
and it's just this insane thing. And she's like, "This is how it is." I'm like, "Yeah, this is what I'm trying to do. What I'm doing, because I'm trying to get all those parents on the sideline to actually have a much deeper awareness of what's happening here, how it's affecting these kids, and then how their own stuff's coming into play, because there is so much trauma being done. It's unique. It is unique. Like I said,
Yeah.
my son and I were playing Fortnite last night together, you
Mm.
know, and when we're playing duos together, we got to communicate as a team. And I mean, even the feedback I give him, he's 9.5. And when we're playing together, if he makes a mistake or something like that, I have to be careful,
Yeah.
because it's really intense. And at one point, I always tell him, "Hey, if you go down, you got to tell me right away so I know what to do." And he went down and he didn't say anything. And then I got shot and I died. I'm like, "Were you down?" He goes, "Yeah." Like, "Why didn't you say something?" I said, "Just like that." And immediately his face just, I'm like, "Oh, buddy, listen, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to hurt your
Yeah.
feelings." And it just, that feedback is so intense. And the up and the down, and now you scored and now you didn't. And I'm having this powwow with the parents the other day. We all start talking about it because they're asking me what I do for a living. We start
Mm.
chatting, and all of a sudden they're like, "Yeah, I think that might be my son too." I think because they're realizing all their kids are out there scared shitless. They realize that. I don't know why he doesn't play more aggressive. I'm
Mm.
like, well, it's because he's 9 years old and he's scared. He's like unconsciously scared. Like they're all realizing, yeah, my kid too, my kid too, yeah, my kid too. Like, oh yeah, hey, we're all discovering we've traumatized our kids. Awesome. Now let's see if we can help.
Yeah,
Let's see
see
if
if
we
we can
can
fix
help.
it a little bit.
Yeah, feel safe, But
Yeah.
it's an epidemic, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I would highly recommend people, especially because I've had parents, reach out to me kind of their kids are along the journey of like venturing over to Europe or venturing into a new
Mhm.
opportunity, and they have questions for me. So I would definitely encourage anyone to go and check out the book Hero by Seth Taylor. But I even remember was one of like like I said at the top, there's things that I still that stick with me from when we first spoke, and I think you said in your first episode something along the lines of like kind of I believe it was called like play therapy or something like that, in which
Yeah,
like there's an idea of like when a kid does something while they're playing, you don't necessarily want to have a big reaction kind of one way or the other,
yeah,
because then you're kind of promoting this idea of like, oh, if they do this thing, then that equates success or that equates love or kind
yeah.
of I imagine it's kind of the same thing, when it comes to soccer. Maybe,
Mhm.
and you can really dive into this much more because you're the expert on it, but maybe remaining a bit more neutral than like kid scores a
Yeah,
goal and we go electric on the sideline, or they pass it to the other team and we're like, what are you doing?
yeah, yeah. You want to stay as neutral as possible, and it's
Mm,
not easy. I mean, I'm a quote unquote expert at this, right? But I mean, I'm having my first experience actually as a parent. I coached for 20 years, but like now I'm as a parent, my first time, and I'm like over on the sideline the other day, and I told my wife, I said, we're going to be as neutral as we can, and we are, and you can see it. Our kid doesn't look at us at all. He
mm,
doesn't look at us, which is the goal. And half the time, you don't really, I don't think think he knows we're there. And that's the goal, is that he's just out there having a fun experience, and that win or lose. So if he fails, he doesn't look at us. And if he succeeds, he doesn't look at us. And that's great. But like the other day, the guys that are coaching him, don't know what I know. Well, how could they, right? They didn't coach for 20 years. They're a couple volunteer dads. I didn't volunteer because I need my son. I want my son to see me as a separate thing. Dad and coach are a different thing. And they, but like, you start seeing that stuff where it's like where the coaches are saying stuff that's not accurate, it's not correct, it's not the proper instruction, it's that kind of
yeah.
stuff. And my ego starts going. And I'm like, saying to my wife, I'm like, I'm a little bit triggered right now. She's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, yeah, I can see that. I'm like, I'm having to, I feel like my ego is like a dog. Like I'm having to pull back on the leash right now because
Mm,
it's starting to go. And I have to watch that. I got to practice what I preach and be aware of that, because ultimately, if I start coaching my kid from the sideline, I start doing that kind of stuff, then I start doing damage. Then I start creating that connection. Like he will be out there and he'll start going, okay. So when I do this, dad feels this way,
yeah.
and then even when I don't do this. And so I want him to be as if we don't exist on that sideline. And that way he can just explore the game. And afterwards, I'm very careful, so I go up to him and go, how you feeling? How you feeling about that one? It's always that. How you feeling? It's not, how was your game? Hey, this and that. In the car going home, it's still tricky because he'll start talking about the game, and my ego's like, oh, you can give him input, but I will from time to time. I'll give him input, but I'll ask him. He'll be talking about something. I'll go, can I give you some input on that one? And he'll go, yeah, But I ask him carefully, and I'm careful in the way that I give it to him. But yeah, and I'm not doing it perfectly. I'm not. There's no perfect way to do it. The goal is to
Yeah.
can we just raise the awareness by 10% on that sideline? If we can, holy cow, we could change the world. If you think about the millions and millions of kids that are playing over there, at least we can be the kind of parents that maybe by the time they're at 15, 14, 15, 16, and they're starting to lose the love, quote unquote, for the game because the trauma showing up, we know what to do with that. We can help them find some therapeutic help. We can help, we can have better conversations with them instead of just that slamming away at them,
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing. I was in a stands the other night for an MLS match, watching a client play, and his dad was there, sitting right behind me. And I like his dad. We've had good conversations, and but his dad knows that he did a lot of damage. He does. He knows this,
Mm,
and he's like, I'm really glad you're here, man. And it's interesting because I get to see the tension after the game. There was a lot of success in the game, and after the game, the client comes to the dad and they hug and they do this thing, and I'm aware of all the tension that exists in that relationship, in that
yeah.
space, and all the hurt and all the pain that exists in that space. And but it's leading to this kind of beautiful thing. But did you watch I'm assuming you watched the David Beckham documentary on
I was just about to bring that up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you remember? I mean, his dad, right? You could see the pain. You could
Yeah.
see it. I mean, I just wanted to throw my arms and give that kind of hug, man. And you could see it. But then, of course, they flash to the dad, and the dad's like, well, it worked, didn't it?
Yeah.
Right? It worked. That's what
Yeah.
he said. He said
And
that.
it's
It worked.
and isn't it so funny too to funny is obviously not the right word, but interesting to see a lot of those players still speak about like, oh yeah, my dad is the reason that I am this person, that I am this player. Like I'm so grateful for my dad, even though they kind of reflect about it almost in a joking way. Oh yeah, there were so many times we were out in the yard, and he would keep making me take the same strike until I just cried. And it's
Yeah.
like now you can reflect on it in a way of like, yes, it made me who I am, but also, you're really kind of just coming out and saying like, yeah, it was deep rooted trauma that I just learned to heal and kind
Yeah.
of adapt to use it as fuel or use it as a fire to get me
Yeah.
to where I am today. Like there was that play, there was Beckham, there was Neville talked about the same thing. He said before every single match he needed to look up into the stands, like find exactly where
Yeah.
his parents were, and that was kind of his like reset for, all right, now I'm okay and I can go and I can play and I'm settled and my nerves are settled. Like I've
Yeah.
spoken to coaches who I've coached under or played for, and they can pinpoint out certain players that when they know their parents are in the stands, they're either going to have an amazing match or that's going to be the thing that puts them in the tank.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating. I'm so curious though, that to be there sitting next to the dad, right? And for him to say like, I'm so happy that you're here.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
because I wonder, I'm like, is he admitting like, yeah, like I know that you're correcting a lot of things that
Yeah.
I probably did or I inflicted.
Yeah. He's admitting it at some level to the best of his ability, which I think is all you kind of need, because when I first started working on this, the parents are basically saying they're paying for it at first, and they're like, and they're saying we messed up and we got to. I remember even doing a session with them at one point because he said he can't sleep if his sons, because there's two of them playing. He's like, if my sons don't play well, I can't sleep. And I'm like, I mean, you literally can't sleep? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, he goes, because I feel their pain. I go, well, what if they're not in pain? Well, I just know they are. Well, how do you know that? Well, I know my boys. I know they're in pain and they just can't sleep. I go, what if, entertain the idea, what if this is you? And then the mom was sitting behind him going, yeah, that's a problem. And he was just humble enough, I think, to hear that, just humble enough to recognize that I made some mistakes, just humble enough to see that there's some things there, which that's all you need. You just need a little bit. You just need enough to just back up and go, hey, at least I'll pay for his therapy. I'll do that. I'll do this work. And that's how I've already told my kids. My kids are 11 and 9. My daughter doesn't even play sports yet, and I've told them already. I'm like, hey, to this time, I'll pay for your therapy. I promise you. It's that's the idea. We have to be just willing enough, to be able to go there, because the difference between my generation and my parents' generation is that, can we be aware enough that we can recognize that we hurt our kids, and
Mhm.
that it's okay that we hurt them because we did the best we could with what we had. And now let's be a part of the repair. Let's be a part of the healing. Let's be a part of that. Like where my parents would, they just thought, when I'd see therapy, it's like, it's insane. They're just like, you just need to go to church more or something like that. And, you know, we just have to be a part of healing. Like when you have kids someday, you're going to hurt them. It's
Yeah.
going to be part of it. You know what I mean? But you're going to do it less than was done to you. And you're going to be a part of the repair process. And when they have kids someday, they're going to hurt their kids a little bit less than you did. And they'll be teaching their kids how to heal themselves by the time they're 7, you know? And that's kind of the thing. My kids are already doing that. They're already doing their own therapeutic work, and we do it all the time. A lot of times with my daughter, it's like, all right, here's the deal. You're either grounded for a week, or you're going to do some energy work. She'll be like, I'll do the energy work. All right. We sit down, we meditate, and as a result, she's learning. She's learning. So, it's a beautiful thing, and they'll both be great athletes. My son is an experiment. He's a fascinating experiment. I held him back for a long time, even though he's wanted to play soccer for years, because he's around
Really.
it all the time, right? We have these healing retreats, and these players come out here, and he's like, he wants to be a pro soccer player. Even though if you watch him, you wouldn't see that. You'd see he wants to be a little goofball kid, and so we're just letting him be that, you know. And at the same time, it's like, well, if you want to do something, he's doing a little private training with this guy. He's teaching him some skills, and he's doing this kind of thing. And he says he wants to be a pro. I think he will be, But instead of this kind of gradual climb in his technical ability, because he doesn't have, if I put him on a U10 premier team right now, I'd just get destroyed. But I think you're going to see him shoot up so high, so fast in his high school years. I think he's going to get so much better that people are going to be shocked, you know,
Mm,
because we allowed an emotional foundation to sit underneath him that is a lot stronger. So there's going to be a type of grit and a type of ability to take the hits. There's not going to be that when they're 14, 15, they don't enjoy the game anymore,
yeah.
but they quote unquote love the game. You know what I mean? Oh, I just love soccer. Really? You don't look like you love soccer, you know? I think he's going to be one of those guys that really does, you know?
Mm, yeah. If you don't
I'm
mind
not,
me asking, why did you kind of hold him back from going into a team environment kind of until this point? As you said, there's players who
yeah.
start when they're 5, right?
Yeah. That well, and the conventional wisdom says, well, he's not going to be able to develop the technical ability, and that's just simply false, in my opinion. But the research has been really clear for a long time that kids actually shouldn't play organized sports till they're about 12. Like, and it's
Mm,
because we know that the studies have been done. We know that the developmental years need to be shielded and protected as much as possible from any type of serious performance oriented arena. So even when it comes to academics, we put kids in school at 5 or so. But like, I mean, I know parents that by 6 and 7 and 8, they're looking at grades and they're going, you got to get your grades up and we got to get A's and we got to get this thing. And we don't do that either. We don't even talk about grades. It's
yeah.
just not a thing. Once they get into high school, we'll talk about grades. We'll say, hey, let's talk about what this looks like in academics if you want to go to certain schools or whatever. But we don't give feedback when it comes to that kind of stuff or make that into a thing because we're protecting those developmental years, letting them explore, letting them just not be in the arena. So even though that, so my daughter, she says she wants to play sports, but truth is, she doesn't really give a shit. She really wants us to be with her friends. So
Mm,
even as she told me the other day, she's got a friend playing Premier Ball for one of the top clubs around here, and she's like, I want to play soccer." I'm like, "Okay." She goes, "And I'm gonna play until I can get on her team because her friends on the team."
yeah.
Now she's a great athlete. She probably could. I said, "Okay, well, that's one of the top teams in the states. So what do you want to do here? Well, let's see if she can get there." And we're just like, "Oh, it's all about friendship. Awesome, go, yeah, go do what you got to do." you know. But it's not going to be us on the sideline going, "You got to be better. You got to be better." That's just not going to happen. You know.
Yeah.
And if they don't make it, they don't make it. That's fine. Like sports, it should not be. I understand what it is as an industry, and trust me, I got a little Uncle Rico in me. Like, there's a part of me. It's like, man, if I'd had the mentality I have right now at 22, I would have played in the national team. I was that good of a player. I was a really good player, and I was a freak of nature athlete. But I was depressed and anxiety ridden, and I was a complete zombie, right? And so I got a little bit of that in me because I mean, when I watched that game the other day and I watched my client score a goal, and I'm just like, God, what does that feel like? like,
Yeah.
it's unique, But at the same time, I wouldn't sacrifice the joy and peace and happiness that I have for anything. And I wouldn't do that for my kids either because they're going to be all right no matter what. Even if they make it when they're super young, they're going to have to stop. Even though everybody's going to call them a grizzly old veteran, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's a wild one. Like the warped view that I have of age that I'm definitely trying to deconstruct and not really, you go
Yeah.
into I was in my team in Australia and just a guy asked me like, "Oh, how old are you again?" And it's like you kind of hesitate even to say it at first because you don't want to be like, "Yeah, I'm 28." And then he's like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, you're ancient." I'm like, "Are you kidding me, brother? Like just because you're 18, like relax."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Isn't that funny? You're this old veteran player. They're out here in Seattle. Nico Ladero just announced it's his last game in Seattle, his last regular season game, so he's going to retire, and he's slowing down a little bit. But man, I'm looking at him. I think he's like 34, and I started doing my own personal healing work when I was 33, and I
Really?
was so young, and I was so hurt, and I mean, that was the beginning of my life at 33. And he's, everybody's like, "Oh, he's old now." I remember being in the stands for Clint Dempsey's last season, and he was struggling, but he wasn't struggling because he was old. He was struggling because he kind of quit. He was frustrated with the coaching staff. He was frustrated with the team, and he just didn't really want to. He didn't want to give it anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember him. He was playing really badly. He's in this game. He's playing really poorly. He's in bad, unforced turnovers, and this guy yells behind me, old man. Starts yelling at. I'm like, what in the world? It's just so funny to me, man. It's just so funny to me because I'm 47 and I got 50 years left. I want to make it to 100 and I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop doing this kind of creative work until my hands can't work, until I can't type a button, and then I can still talk until my voice
Yeah.
gives out. And then I can still just sit and meditate and be present with people and listen, I guess, until my ears give out. I'm just going to do that until it's all done. You know, and I think at 90, I'll be much more masterful than I am now. So,
Yeah.
I'm probably a lot happier.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you've had kind of so many different eras almost in your life of new things that you've pursued, new things that you've done, new phases of your life, family, and like there's just who's to say that you can't keep reinventing yourself or adding new elements to who you are as a person. I think it's yeah, I definitely don't subscribe to like the you work till this age, then you retire, and then just that's it, nothing new.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Sports is a unique, very short, very unique chapter for sure. And it's a very intense catalyst. So it has a very, very profound gift buried in it if people know how to take advantage of that.
Hmm.
That's the biggest reason that athletes need to engage in their therapeutic processes, because they're missing a lot of the gift that the sport's trying to give them for the rest of their lives. Right. That's the biggest thing. I was just like, don't. And the athletes I work with eventually are like, oh, I don't want to miss what it's trying to show me, what it's trying to teach me. I always tell them, like, this experience will tell you everything you need to know about how to become a man.
Yeah.
So let's not miss that. So if we walk out of this pro sports experience and you haven't grabbed that, then yeah, we really missed an opportunity. And then you got to learn it in the next phase, which is gonna be harder. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to kind of encapsulate the conversation today because I know you've got other things to go get to, but I mean, I've definitely kind of felt that, and I've felt that from a lot of people that I've spoken to. That I think when they really get to the root of why why do we love the game, right?
Yeah.
It's oftentimes it's not necessarily the actually just going out and playing. It's
Yeah.
the people that it's brought into your life, the deep connections that you have with people that you've been able to share a field with or a locker room with, and
Yeah.
also what it's the fact that it's been a vehicle for you to grow and develop yourself as a person, and it challenges you each and every day and each and every year,
Yeah.
and it gives you something to strive for and try and accomplish, and you learn so much about yourself doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where, if we all had to really answer it, why the love is it's maybe somewhere kind of tied into that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that we could say that soccer is objectively lovable, like a person, right? It's an objectively awesome thing, and we have this super complicated relationship, the same way we have complicated relationships with each other, but yeah, there's so much beauty in this space, man. I'm telling you, we just need to evolve. We just need to evolve this conversation. This conversation you and I are having needs to be a conversation that GMs are having with presidents of teams and
Hmm.
head coaches. Really, it needs to. And I've
Yeah.
had a few conversations with some high level coaches and stuff like that. And they're all like, yeah, man, totally on board with that. But then when it comes to actually bringing it into the culture of these groups and these teams, they don't do it because they're all scared of their own stuff. Everybody's scared of their own pain. I get that. I totally
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate the conversation. It's a wonderful one to have. So
Yeah. Yeah, of course, man. I'm definitely happy that the audience gets to share it, but selfishly, I'm always super pumped when I get to talk to you in a format like this because I feel like I gain so much from it and learn so much. So I appreciate you taking the time. Like you said, I know you're very busy. Before you go, where can they go and find the book? Where can the people find it?
well, it's live on Amazon right now. So we started a company called 3A Athletics, and 3athletics.com is our website. It's not actually quite finished yet. It's almost finished, but you can go there and have a look if you want. But the book is on it. You can find it on Amazon for now. So if you just type in Seth Taylor Hero, Seth Taylor Hero Soccer should come up because it's brand new on there. The algorithms haven't quite kicked in yet,
Yeah.
but it's on there. And yeah, we're gonna, we're gonna. I want to sell millions of these things. We're going to throw a lot of money behind some campaigns pretty soon. So if anybody out there is a soccer person, you're probably going to see it in your feed. In the
Yeah.
near future, we also have a coaching book called The Coaching Revolution for coaches. Same kind of thing, therapeutic
Hmm.
process for coaches to build this type of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah,
coming out
something
soon.
out there for everyone, whether you're player, coach, parent, whatever kind of your role is associated with the game. I think there's something for you. Yeah, I can't thank you enough, man. This has been awesome.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
That is it for this week's episode. Thank you to Seth once again. I always feel like those are kind of selfishly the best episodes for me, because it allows me to kind of just talk about some of the things that are going on in my life and in my career. And he always has really good insight for me. And as I said at the very top of the episode, always kind of validate some of the things that I feel or experience going through this world of professional soccer, as it's stressful, and there's something about knowing that you're not alone in experiencing something that makes it maybe a tad bit easier to handle. So thank you to him. I hope that all of you were able to gain some value from that, and hopefully that some of the things that we spoke about, perhaps are some things that you felt and resonated with, and you don't feel alone in going through any of those things. And I always encourage, whether it's to someone like Seth or someone like myself, a lot of athletes go through very similar things. And for some reason, a lot of us have this habit of thinking that we're the only one to experience it and no one else is going through the same thing. But many of us are. So if you ever are experiencing something difficult, something just doesn't feel right mentally, you don't feel in a good spot, I'm happy to be a person to reach out to when it comes to trying to handle those things, or trying to give you suggestions on ways to kind of cope or move forward with the process. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you very much. You are one of the top tier supporters of this podcast, and it's been really cool to see, especially recently, kind of the show grow in the way that it has. Make sure, if you're listening, watching, whatever you're doing right now, show your support in some way, shape, or form, whether that's a subscribe, whether that's a follow, whether that's a like, whether that's a comment. Do that one little thing for me here on the way out, and I will catch you on the next one. Got a couple of really interesting players coming up in the coming weeks. We still have the episode where I will speak about my time in Australia, as I'm going to have someone interview me. Don't worry, I have not forgotten about that one. And yeah, more content to come. I'll catch you on the next one, guys. Peace.